Welcome, everyone. Welcome to BugFest, Plan B. We are almost at the end of our really fun week of virtual programming, and we're so excited that you can join us today. As you are joining up, if you can type into the chat, how many species of bees do you think there are in the world? You might know the answer for North America, and you might know the answer for worldwide. So you can put either one in the chat while we're waiting for everybody to join. And we are joining in Zoom and in YouTube. So I'm going to go through a quick Zoom tutorial in just a moment before I introduce our guest speaker. Let's see. All right. So we have a guess of 2,000 species in the world. We have a guess of 40,000 species. We have 20,000 worldwide, 4,000 North America. 250,000. That'd be pretty cool. All right, so we will get to some of those. We can confirm that in just a moment. But my name is Martha Fisk, and I'm an educator with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And so we're going to go through our Zoom tutorial quickly. So we are having our sound muted and our videos off this morning, and we should have closed captioning available. And the next few slides are showing you how to make sure that you have the best viewing set up, both for your subtitles and for our presentation. So here's what your subtitles will look like. And then you'll want to select speaker view so that you can see us on the sidebar. And then you can select side by side. And then you can also drag the little line back and forth to make the presentation screen larger so that you can see everything in greater detail. And then as part of our program today, we'd love to interact with you during the chat, during the program. Please ask questions, make comments. Please be a good digital citizen, which means that you stay on topic, you are respectful, and you can reply in maybe one line in the chat and not much more than that. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that I can introduce our guest speaker today, who we are so excited could join us this morning. So I would love to introduce you to Victor Gonzalez, and he is an assistant professor at the University of Kansas, and he is originally from Colombia, South America. He completed his undergraduate degree in biology at the National University of Colombia in Bogota, and he finished his PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Kansas and a postdoctoral training with the pollinating insect unit of the USDA in Logan, Utah. Victor has been an intern at the Smithsonian Tropical Institute in Panama and a Fulbright Scholar on biodiversity and sustainable development in Colombia. Victor has worked on bee classification, pollination, and ethnobiology, and his current research examines responses of bees to climate change. Thank you so much for joining us today, Victor, and I'm going to hand over the reins to you, and so he can continue with his joy of bugs with us today.
Hi, Martha, and everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here today and to be able to share some of the things that I have done and I would like to do with these carpenter bees, which I know that this is the insect, right, that everyone right now is interested, or the insect that we want to talk about today. If you want, I can start sharing my screen. Okay.
Carrie commented again how much she loves carpenter bees, and we hope maybe at the end you will appreciate them a little bit more too.
Okay, let me see if you can see that right now. And I was just looking at the answers to your question of how many species we have in the world, and this is something that I'm going to mention at the beginning. So first, and I know that we commonly hear about what are bees, right? Like bees, even my daughter who's 10 years old right now is talking about bees, and I was thinking when I was a kid, I've never thought about bees, but right now I know there is a lot of interest about bees. So it brings to the question, like bees are insects. We know that, and they are part of this group of insects that are called Hymenoptera, where they're grouped with ants and wasps. And bees are very interesting because these are, we can think of them as cousins of some wasps that they decided not to eat meat anymore and become vegetarian. So pollen, which is we found in flowers, is the protein that they basically change, instead of using flesh. And here are some examples of these pollen grains that are different colors, shapes, and also the structures that these bees are using to carry, to manipulate this pollen and to bring it back to their homes. Some of these hairs may be just simple as our own hair, or may have some little branches, which sometimes are really have different shapes that allows them to collect and manipulate this pollen. Sometimes these pollen collecting structures are located on their legs, but sometimes they may have it on their faces, on their thorax. So different places where they're collecting these pollen. When we think about bees, or at least for most people, even my mom, whenever I start talking about bees, everyone immediately think of honeybees as the only bee. And still this is something that we see, that honeybees are equal to bees, but in reality, we have more than 20,000 bee species. And I know one of you already mentioned how many species, because I know this person have read what this person have written, and also one of the guys for North Carolina bees is written by this person, by the person who wrote, who's mentioned this correct number of species. But we have more than 20,000 of bee species, and honeybees is just one of them. And we have them in all shapes, size, and colors. So we have some of these, like you see here in the upper left of your screens, that are metallic in color. Some of them are about the size of honeybees, and they carry and they cut leaves to make their nests, as you see here. Some of them are nesting in the ground or nesting in the snails or seashells. Really, really different ways to make their nests, and also to utilize all the resources available. And here we have some of them that are completely black, and they're carrying some resins and seeds from the trees in the tropical forests. So a lot of diversity. This guide actually to the North Carolina bees, you can find them online. And I took this tree of life for the bees just to show, that we have 7 families of bees, and this is in terms of the classification. And the Carpenter bees are in this family, what we call Apidae. And here it is to show that the whole group of bees are related to the digger wasps, right? They evolved about 120 million years ago, when basically flowering plants start getting diverse. And in this family of this group of Apidae, we have our Carpenter bees, honeybees, and bumblebees. There are some other bees that are in this group that are less known, but this is a large family, and it's widely distributed, where we have a large number of species. Even though we have more than 20,000 bee species, which means that we have the double number of birds in the world. And as some of you mentioned, in North America, we have around 4,000 species. So we have 4 times the number of birds in our country. Most of them are tiny. And that's what I call them invisible bees, because they just pass, we don't see them, right? They're so tiny unless we're looking for those. And this is an example of one species that measures a few millimeters, and you just can see, how tiny they are in comparison to an insect pin or to your nail. So really, really tiny bees. So when we think about all this diversity, where it is found, we can see it in a map that was recently available to us. And the darker the area, the more species we have. So first, we can see that um, when it's in areas that is too cold, they're not doing well. And the other thing that is very interesting for the bees is that in the tropics they're not very common. So bees are more diverse outside the tropics, which doesn't make sense, right, to us, because when all of us are talking about tropical forests, we think of the most diverse places on Earth, but not for bees. For bees, you see that places like North America, all the Mediterranean region, even South America, Southern Africa, Australia, are the places where we have this diversity of bees. Why is that? Well, there's some hypotheses. Nobody knows for sure. But the reality is that if we're living here in the United States, or we're going to the Mediterranean region, Spain, Greece, Turkey, all of these contain a high diversity of bees in comparison to countries like Colombia, where I am from. When we look at North America, it's clear that all the southwestern United States contains the most diversity. And when we, just as an example, when we look at places like some national parks, just to give you an idea, so here we have Nevada and Utah and some of the parks, and these are numbers of species. We see that they're extremely diverse. As an example, Colombia, my home country, is about the size of Texas, and it has 400 species. And if you look here, someplace in California has the same number. So extremely diverse number of species in this area.
And Victor, really quick.
Yes.
So 2 questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
So Elsa asked, is there any chance the tropics are just undersampled because it's hard to detect bees in the canopy compared in the desert where all the flowers are at human height?
Yes, so there are different hypotheses. One of them is that, and I know that the more people are studying the canopy, the more they're finding new things. Also, well, the other reason is that the most people with the means to study that live in in North America and Europe. And in fact, some of the first explorers, came from these areas going into the tropics and trying to understand that. The other reason is that in the tropics, we have species that are very social, even more social than the bumblebees, and equally to social to the honeybees. And they are, well, they have more number of individuals, and they can compete with the others. We don't have strong seasons like here in these parts of the earth. So there is no synchronization between the plants and the bees. So yeah, so there are different hypotheses, yes, and undersampling is one of them. I agree with Elsa.
Thank you. And one more question.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not as much diversity of bees, what is doing the pollinating in the tropics?
Good question too, and this is, so the bees are not the only pollinators, right? We have flies, we have butterflies, moths, other mammals that are pollinating those plants. But I think, and again, nobody have tried to answer those questions. Most of there's some group of bees that are called the stingless bees that I'm going to mention just briefly. They can hive, their hives are perennial, so they live forever. And they have colonies that range from like 500 individuals up to 5,000, 10,000. So these are the ones doing most of the pollination there. So the map that I showed is a number of species, not a number of individuals, right? So that is
That's a good reminder too. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so first question I already mentioned said the answer is like if all bees sting, and the answer is no. We have some bees some species that are about 400 species that are found in the tropics that basically their sting is not developed and they don't sting, and they're called stingless bees. And these actually are one of my favorite bees because they also come in all shapes and forms and colors, and people have developed really interesting relationships with them since the Mayan times, Aztecs, and have raised them. These are some trunks where the bees are nesting, and they bring it to their homes or close to their homes, and they extract pollen and nectar right now in the tropics of the American tropics, as well as in Asia and Africa. A lot of people are trying to invest in developing these projects as a sustainable way to maintain, like the sources of pollen and nectar for these communities. But this is one of the most interesting species, I guess, a group of species in the tropics because of that. There is, even if you have the opportunity to go to Cancun in Mexico, that even some of the old temples, you can see a god that these people believed came in the form of a bee from the sky and helped the crops, to form their fruits and things like that. So it's a lot of relationships, cultural relationships of these bees with the people in these areas. My second question is like if all bees make honey. That's another common question, and not all bees make honey. We have bees that are parasitic, some bees that are solitary, that they don't storage honey. They storage pollen, but not honey. And even bumblebees, they don't make honey as the honeybees. They storage some nectar, right? But because of the colonies they don't last, and there are no perennial colonies, except in the tropics, they don't storage honey. So honey is basically restricted to honeybees among the bee world, right? And stingless bees. I mentioned there that we have some parasitic bees, and what does it mean? So bees that are parasitic are illustrated here on this on the right picture. They look like a wasp, right? They don't have a lot of hairs. Their body are more slender. And on the left side of your screen, I have a free-living, a non-parasitic bee, and this is one of the leaf-cutter bees. You can clearly see they're hairier. They have all the pollen that have been collected, and in the case of these species, and even their larvae are crazy. Here, this is a illustration of the normal larvae. This is the head. You can see some sort of look like the eyes, kind of cute. But when we look at the larvae of the parasitic bees, are a little bit scary. You see that they have these huge kind of fangs, right? And in fact, they developed, they're like cuckoo bees. They developed faster than their host, and they will go and kill the host larvae and then remain there. So a lot of people are studying these behaviors, which are really, really cool, and how these parasitic bees are able to basically to survive. Very important because they tell us how healthy the bee community is in an area. So what about if the bees live in colonies or hives, just like honeybees? Well, not all of them do that. And in fact, most bees are solitary. So when we think of bees with a living in a hive, with a drone, with a queen, we're talking about the minority here. The great majority of bees are solitary, and something in between. And when I say something in between, is that they may live next to each other, like us living in different apartments, but we don't share a room, or we don't share expenses, and totally solitary, like like this bee, for instance, that they will find a place to nest. They build a cell, bring pollen to feed the larvae, and then just leave. So there are no contact. There is no contact between the mom and the babies. Some of these are parasites, like as I mentioned before, and some of them even have some variable social behavior, which is even more, in my opinion, more extreme. It's hard to think that. And also, not all bees are pollen or nectar lovers. These are some cases of tiny bees, stingless bees in the tropics, that they, instead of collecting pollen from flowers, they collect tears. So these are the tear drinking bees. In these photos here, you can see these 1, 2, and 3 bees. These are flies. Flies are also getting tears. And what happens with tears is that tears, in addition to having water and salts, they also may have some amino acids. And in the tropics, even though we don't have seasons, we have a rainy season and a dry season. When it's rainy, maybe sometimes we don't have enough sources of flowering sources, so they start changing that for this kind of sources, right? For tears, just to substitute the proteins here.
And Victor, I'm wondering,
Yeah.
There's a bee that I've called a sweat bee in the past. And is that what we would call those little bees, like that come and land on your skin and they're not biting you, but they seem to be like, they get on you when you're hiking?
These are different because they're trying to get the salts, right?
Right.
Yeah, but these are actually they're drinking the tears, from yeah. Even from other animals. I know a few years ago, you could see that in some of the, Facebook and Instagram or pictures, or some bees taking tears from turtles and some other animals, large animals in the tropics. This is one that a friend of mine let me borrow from Colombia, and this is on a little bird, and the tiny bee just trying to get tears from them too. Even in the tropics, when we have sometimes a lot of rainy seasons, little flowers, there are some bees that have reverted. They have basically go back to be carnivores, and these are called the vulture stingless bees, which is here the one on the lower right. You see how the mandibles have a lot of these teeth that allow them to basically remove the flesh from small animals. Here in this photograph on the left, I don't know if you guys can see, well, these dark areas are the bees, and you can see a little bit of the foot of a frog, right? Or a toad, and here on the other you can see that too. So, and these are really kind of unique bees. We have about 5 species of those that you never see them collecting pollen from flowers. They're always collecting the protein, which is the pollen, from the flesh of dead animals. Even their pollen collecting structures are not developed as in other bees. Because they don't need it, right? They just get it. They get this and they bring it back to their nest. So, okay, what about carpenter bees? And I know I've been talking about something else, but I wanted to make sure that we contextualize this, and this is something that, after I mentioned this about these general lessons about bees, if most of them are not making honey, most of them are solitary. Some of them not even collect pollen. They take the protein from tears or flesh. So why are bees so important? What is the big deal about bees? And I know that some of you already know the answer, and it's because pollination, right? And bees are now more even known as pollinators than honey making insects. But here, and as I was mentioning earlier, Well, a pollinator is an animal that basically brings pollen, which is the male cell from a plant, from a flower to another flower. And when this pollinator does that, it basically is helping the plant to reproduce, right? Um, and these pollinators can be of different kinds. And we have bees, we have birds, some mammals, and as I was mentioning earlier, we have some beetles, some flies, that in some places, these insects may be replacing bees. For instance, in the Andes, in the mountains, we have little bees, but we have a lot of beetles and flies that are the main pollinators in these areas. But we tend to forget that because we have been focused on bees lately, and but there are other insects that are also pollinating, are very important pollinators of different wild and cultivated plants too. And the importance of these pollinators is not minimal. About 88% of all the plants with flowers are pollinated by animals. So this is a huge portion of these plants with flowers that are depend minimally or strongly from pollinators, and bees is one of the most important. And I say, why are bees the most important pollinators? Because they depend, most of the species depend entirely of pollen. You know, like some of these beetles or flies, through their life cycle, they may visit some of the flowers, but bees, you know, they require the larvae, and the adults are using those resources, so they're basically dependent on the pollen and nectar from flowers. Other insects don't. You know, they're only part of their life cycle are associated with the flowers. So carpenter bees consist of about 470 species. So there's a lot of species. I know that in North America, we have about 5 species. North Carolina, about 2 species or 2 species there. So most of the species diversity of carpenter bees are located in the tropics. Any idea why? Well, you may think that these in the tropics there are more trees and more places to nest in. Who knows? But the reality is that even though they are found pretty much everywhere in the world, even in oceanic islands, the diversity is in the tropics. We find them from sea level up into the mountains in the Andes in South America, sometimes reaching altitudes of 3,000 meters, which would be, I don't know, 10,000 feet above sea level, so really high. Sometimes they are being caught when people are moving, you know, trunks and logs from one place to another, and they will just cut them, but maybe they may not be established at high elevations. In some islands, they actually being transported by nesting in palms, you know, and when there is a storm or something, all the trunks are floating in the ocean and eventually reach an island and they colonize that place. And when we think about carpenter bees, we think of bees that are probably using wood, you know, to nest and also making damage to houses. You know, here we have one example of the bee just burrowing a hole into a post or part of a house. In some cases, in some places like this is in Thailand, that they're using the bamboo canes, you know, to nest. And as you may see here in these pictures, you know, in some cases they're using hardwood, you know, to burrow their nests. You know, here some of the tunnels, and you see these divisions are the cells, each one containing a single individual. And in these cases here, these are a hollow stalk or stem where they're nesting. Something very curious, and I was mentioned this earlier to some of you, is that these carpenter bees are laying the largest eggs among bees. Just look at the size. This is an egg, and look at the size, it's almost filling the entire cell. So it's, when you compare with the adult, it's about as large as the adult bee. So really large eggs. And these are the different stages of the bee development. These bees and any other insects that experience a metamorphosis or changes from egg, from a larvae and pupa and an adult. You can see all the stages here. The cells are basically divided by this division made of sawdust that the adult will chew and glue with some secretions, and they make these tight divisions among the cells. You may think, well, if the bee goes here and lays an egg, and towards the entrance, we have the last cell that is built. So the very first cell that is built is going to emerge earlier, right? And if it emerges earlier, it may have to basically go through all of the other cells, perhaps damaging them until it's born. Sometimes that happens, but most of the time, the last cell to be built in this nest are males. So the males develop faster than the females, and they emerge first, and then that way kind of overcome this obstacle, right? Some carpenter bees are solitary, just like this one here, in which a female will go make a nest, lay an egg, close it, and then leave and start another one, and the mom and their babies never overlap in the same nest. However, in some species, and even within the same species, depending on the location and the seasonality of the area, they may leave. The mother and their daughters will live, and even their sons will live there for a while. So there is some variation in sociality, never reaching the levels of honeybees with the queen and drones, but still living in a community, sometimes sharing. Sometimes the mom is the one foraging to get the food, but sometimes the daughters are the ones going into the field, collecting nectar, pollen, and making the cells. We always think of carpenter bees as creatures that are black, are big, the size of bumblebees, but in reality, we have a huge diversity of body sizes, colors, hairiness, and behaviors here too. So some of these examples are just, I guess, the prettiest carpenter bees. None of them occur in North America, I believe. Some of these are in Southeast Asia, in South America, the Mediterranean region. But as you see here, they have blue colors, metallic integument, or metallic skin color, basically, or hairs that are red, brownish, yellow, like this one here. And so it's a lot of diversity in this morphology, and also in body size. So I mentioned that most bees are tiny, right? And these are the exception. These are the bees that are basically on the other side of the range in body sizes. Here we have bees that are really large, which allows them to fly long distances to resist changes in temperature, for instance. However, there are some species that are about the size of a little bit larger than a honeybee, and some that are much larger than a bumblebee, for instance. Basically, looking at the size of a bumblebee queen. So a lot of diversity in these body sizes, as well as in the nesting behavior. The same name, carpenter bees, is telling us that they are nesting in wood, right? But that's not always the case. We have a group of carpenter bees that initially people thought that they were sort of related to carpenter bees, but they were not, because they actually make nests in the ground. So this is the most interesting thing, and poorly studied. We have about 17 species that are living in the deserts of Western China, parts of the Mediterranean region, and they nest in these cliffs or these banks in hard soil. They just like any other minor bees, they would just go inside the ground and make a nest. Here on the lower right, you can see some of the cells that are built, different arrangements. Um, just like um, the bees that make nests in wood, these bees tend to basically overwinter as an adult. And so some of these bees are able to, when they are born, go down the soil, sometimes several centimeters deep, and remain there during the winter time, because outside the temperatures are minus 18 Celsius degrees, which are, I don't know, like maybe 20 Fahrenheit or so, even colder than that. And this is another example of how this group were basically finding ways to survive in some of these environments. As you can see, there are no trees around. So one of the hypotheses is that these bees, well, initially were nesting in wood like any other carpenter bee, but there were some changes in the climate that basically the entire region changed from a forested area to a xeric, sparse, no tree area, and they start finding ways to survive. And one of the hypotheses is that they start basically shifting a wood nesting behavior into a ground nesting behavior.
Really quickly,
yes.
Back to that slide, the circles around some of the spots. Are they like around that, or are they behind that?
The entrances. These are where you can see them. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's just like there is nothing noticeable about it. Just a hole in the ground.
Right.
And okay. I've never found one of those. I tried to find one of those species in Greece, which is this one here on the left, that also is very, very interesting because some of these are flying at night. And so all of these carpenter bees are diurnal bees. Sometimes they switch their schedule and they start flying either early in the morning or late in the evening, when there is no competition for flowers. Because during the day there are bumblebees and other bees are trying to get, and other insects trying to get the pollen and nectar, but these bees, they decided, somehow to start, avoiding this competition and flying early or late in the evening when there is almost no sun. These bees actually have, because they're flying on the little light, their eyes are larger, and this structure here that allow them to see the presence or absence of light are also larger. This photo here is not a carpenter bee, but it shows, this is another nocturnal bee, that it shows that nocturnal bees actually have larger eyes, and also they're a little bit paler in color, because they don't have these melanins, this pigment that give them the dark color present in other diurnal species. Just because they are nocturnal, it doesn't mean there are no pollinators. Here, this is a plant that is common in this Mediterranean region. I don't know how many of you can recognize it, but this is the caper bush, right? This is these flowers are opening only once at night, and these are one of the pollinators of this, with moths, are one of the pollinators of the plant. So they are important pollinators even for nocturnal plants. And talking about pollination, there is one particular example that is, to me, is very fascinating, and it's the relationship of these carpenter bees with passion fruits. So passion fruits or passifloras are these flowers here. I was told that they're also occurring here in the United States, particularly in the southern United States, but they're the flowers are really, really beautiful. You see it here on the left side. These flowers open on a single day, um, in some species only during the morning, and then they're gone. If they don't receive pollination, they die, and we don't see any of the fruits. And these are the fruits here. They come in different colors, textures, flavors, and even there are some studies that show that the pollination by these bees increases the sugar in the fruits. And some countries like Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, in South America, even some Asian countries are the main exporters of these and cultivators of these passion fruits. So they depend directly or indirectly of these bees, for their production. And why they are so important for these crops is like here we have the flower, and if you can recognize, these are the honeybees. Well, these structures that you see are the male part. These are the ones producing the pollen, and these structure on top are the female part. So we need somebody, a pollinator, that brings the pollen from here and go here into the female part to make a fruit. And remember, that has to be during a few hours on a single day per flower. Well, as you may see here, the honeybees are too tiny to do this unless they move around. But in the case of the carpenter bees, they just fit the size. When they go here to get the nectar in the center of the flower, you see that the pollen is stick to all the dorsal part of this bee, to the back of the bee, and also is touching the stigma here, the female part of the flower, thus producing fruit. So this is something that people have realized, and in places like Brazil and some in Argentina are trying to provide nesting sites for these bees and manage them so they can increase the pollination by the carpenter bees. In Colombia, however, this is some study that I did a couple of years before the pandemic, that basically we were looking at crops, passion fruit crops, and asking the farmers about the bees and the crops, and if they knew, and we noticed that they have a limited knowledge of pollination. They didn't know, and in some cases, they actually killed the bees because they thought that they were damaging the flowers in some areas. And they attributed the low production to soil problems or little management, or lack of management practice, for instance. In some cases, they just abandoned the crops, just basically wasting time and efforts. But in some areas where they realized that there is some pollination issues here, they start increasing their crops, expanding the number of plants. This is another state in Colombia. And they knew about the pollination, and neither they started using more pesticides because they cut down all the forests around that they were providing nesting sites for the bees and pollinating the plants. And what happened was that they started relying on manual pollination. So to my surprise, and I have read accounts of these human pollinators about 10 years ago, when it was minimal. Some people will just go and help the plants to do the job of a bee. But in 2019, when we went back, pretty much everyone was doing manual pollination. There were not any of these carpenter bees around. No bees were flying because they increased the number of plants, they increased the use of pesticides, and they were actually hiring women and children to do this pollination. So you see this kid was probably 14, 15 years old, and he was paid. His job was that during the flowering season of the passion fruits, he will go, and you see his hands, all this yellow dust is the pollen. He will go between the flowers, grab the male part, get the pollen, and then do that with another flower. This increases up to 30% the production of the crop per hectare. So that is a lot. We're talking about 2 acres here. That is a lot for families, who are trying to live out of this crop. So at some point, just like it happened in some areas of the world, this is an example in China. in one of the, I forgot I think Zonan province, that they basically, they didn't have pollinators. And the pollination of apple was done by hand, just like they're doing in Colombia right now. 10 years later, they just couldn't handle it. It wasn't sustainable. And they have to basically change crops and forget about the pollination and forget about apples here. So in summary, I just wanted to convey here that carpenter bees are very diverse in terms of their body sizes, morphology, coloration, behaviors. So very diverse, right? They are mostly diverse in the tropical regions where they are ecologically and economically important, right? I just mentioned a few examples in the case of the passion fruit, which are several species, several crops that are depending on these bees, and even some species are at risk. You know, right now, and I speak about Colombia in particular for these bees, that as you know, the marketing start opening in Europe and in other countries to export these passion fruits. More people want to grow these crops, and most people want to use pesticides to control, you know, the pests that are being you know, more and more frequent now when you have a single crop in an area. Okay, so I think we have a few more minutes. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I know I see several questions there, so yeah, I'm happy to discuss them.
Great, thank you. So I didn't forget the question earlier about bee defense. I'm going to go back to that one in just a moment.
Okay.
But Sheila wanted to know, do all bees have eyes on the top of their head? Like in that picture that you showed us.
Yes, so these eyes are called ocelli, and these are basically structures that allow them to detect, you know, when there is light and when there is no light, and help them to navigate, you know, to flight. And so if you are flying at night, well, you need to get as much information as you can, right? And so your eyes tend to be bigger, and this is one of the structures that gets bigger, so they can basically maximize the light that it comes into your eyes. But they don't, these three eyes on top, they don't produce images. You know, just basically take this as like a light or no light available, and to help to navigate the bee.
Okay, thank you. And then earlier when we were talking about the stingless bees, one of our participants wanted to know how they defend themselves if they have no stinger.
On the stingless bees, yes.
Yeah.
So this is even crazier, you know, with the stingless bees. So we have some bees that are basically, if you go and disturb their nests, they just hide inside their nest, and they seal the entrance with some resins, and that's it. But we have some others that are called fire bees, because when they bite you, they drop a drop of formic acid and some other acids there. At first, it looks like a little burn, you know, like you itches a little bit, but then like 2 days later, you get a blister, a huge blister. And I read these accounts, you know, from books, and the first time I found one of those nests, you know what I did? I just went there and put my head, you know, moved the nest.
Like every good scientist.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to try that. And 2 days later, I couldn't even comb my hair.
Oh my goodness.
Because I had blisters, yes. And you know, there's some reactions, you know, people get, are more sensitive than others, but they usually give a really big blister on their skin. So people know that, people call them like the fire bees, that they have different names, and they respect them because when they are located, they don't even go by. Some other bees, these stingless bees, they just, they have really strong mandibles with sharp teeth, and they will bite really hard. They're going through your nostrils, ears, eyes, and they're just annoying. So you just walk away. And as I was mentioning, some of the nests could contain up to 10,000 bees. So imagine 1,000 bees doing that. Even if they don't sting, they're doing, you know, all these noisy behavior, like biting your face, and they know which parts are more sensitive, your neck and ears, and then you just walk away, So they're easy to handle when we compare them with honeybees or Africanized honeybees in the tropics, but still, they can be annoying at some point.
Thank you. And then Hugo asked earlier, can you tell us about your career path and how you ended up studying bees? Because you mentioned that you were originally from Colombia.
Yes, so I grew up in a region actually that I showed some of the pictures there where the people grow the passion fruits, and I was interested in plants, and obviously when you are looking at plants, you must have to see the flowers and the insects that go to them. So I went to study biology and in the National University in Bogota. I was in a different region, and as part of this training and collecting insects for some of the classes, I was faced with the problem of what bees is this, what insect is this, and my professor at the time, she didn't know what it was, or barely know, like, okay, this is a carpenter bee, yeah, but which one? Here there are 5 carpenter bees in North America. In Colombia, we have 30 or more than that, and we still don't know which species is which. So she just gave me some textbooks that turned out to be written by Charles Michener, who was an emeritus professor and who wrote Bees of the World. And I remember trying to read those. First, I chose to learn French instead of English, so I had to taught myself English, and I was using a dictionary. At the time, we didn't have Google or thing like that, so I was with a huge dictionary, word by word, trying to translate that because I was eager to know what this bee was, right? I remember then sending a telegram to Michener here in Kansas, and 2 months later, I received a letter saying that that he was able to translate what I wrote because I wrote it in Spanish, and it was in half Spanish, half English, because he knew a little bit of Spanish and Portuguese too. And he was inviting me to come to Kansas to bring the material and to learn about bees. So that was my path, to Kansas. So I came to Kansas with my backpack and my bees and trying to identify them. I'm still trying to identify bees from Colombia because we don't know all of these species yet. And then from there is, the story, just I decided to do a PhD here to continue working with bees. And that's it, exploring different aspects of bees, since, ranging from classification, biology. When you work with distinguished bees, you are going to work with people, with local people, local farmers, indigenous communities. So I did some work on ethnobiology in Mexico and Colombia. Also pollination, right now our bees are even more important than before, or at least people are recognizing their importance as pollinators. And so governments and locally people are eager to know that. So I guess my interests and efforts have been switching more, to that aspect too. But yeah, so that's my path with the bees, and I guess you start meeting new people and getting to know all these fascinating biologies and behaviors of bees. I mean, every time that you learn something, there are more questions that you are enthusiastic. You want to answer those, and yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So for anyone out there who is, working towards wondering what they might do, careers start with that sense of wonder and looking for answers to questions. So thank you for sharing that with us.
And you're welcome.
Marcel wants to know if you have a favorite bee.
Favorite bee? I don't think so. I don't think I have one in particular. No.
It's hard to pick a favorite when you love them all, right?
You love them all, yeah. Well, and even all insects, like flies, like early this year, I was in Colombia working in the mountains and with pollinators. We have there a lot of bumblebees, well, not a lot, but no in comparison to North America. There are like 5 species, but I saw a lot of the flies, syrphid flies, bombilid flies, um, that are being pollinators, and people don't even think about them because we're just now focused to bees. And so, I start appreciating them too. And also some of the beetles that are very common, and they're doing an important function for our ecosystems, our crops. But yes, in particular, I don't think I have one. Each one is telling us something, right? And it's sharing the story, and each one has its own relationship with people. Like some people, indigenous people, for instance, in South America, they don't even recognize carpenter bees as bees. They think they are more like beetles. And in some cases, like the Mixtec communities in the western part of Mexico, whenever they see a carpenter bee, they think that these are spirits, of a deceased that are coming to visit their homes. So I mean, there are many things, that are related to that are fascinating aspects of the bee biology and ecology too.
That's an amazing story too. So they don't kill them, I imagine, if they think that it's their relatives coming to visit, right?
They don't. I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
If the carpenter bees coming to their home, then they would be less likely to harm them because.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a new way to think of our bees that come and visit us here in the States.
Yes, that's it. It was surprising because they don't. For them, the only bees are the honey bees and the stingless bees because they're producing honey and wax. But these ones are not even bees. They are something else,
Yes. Sorry, and I'll share one more comment from Elsa, who said, "I think I have more carpenter bees than relatives." Maybe this is your relatives going way, way, way back, Elsa.
Something that when we were discussing earlier, Martha, you mentioned that why is that here carpenter bees are pests, and right. In other countries are not. And I was thinking more and more about that because one of the reason is that we don't have a lot of the houses or buildings made of wood. They're made of brick, so there are no places for them to nest. And second, I would say that perhaps, in the tropics, we have more trees, so there are more places for them to nest in than here, in some areas here, of course, right? Part of that is also the changing in landscape, we're using or expanding more into the forested areas where these bees are living, and we're providing them with optional homes, right, which are our houses, and that might be a pest in this area. But yeah, in other countries, they are not really a pest. They, like I said, people don't even care about these bees in terms of where they're nesting because they don't live next to us, right, next to the houses.
Thank you. We do have another question, but I think we are also, we have 2 minutes left. So okay. I can ask the question really quickly, but in case anybody is leaving, do you mind if you stop sharing your screen and I share really quickly just for our last parting slide? And then Marcel, I think you can answer your question as well. Okay, so thank you. All right, and this is just our reminder for if you're interested in purchasing a BugFest shirt, there's a link on this slide for you to check out. We also are so thankful for our sponsor, BASF, in supporting our program for BugFest Plan B this year. And you can continue your support of the museum with the museum membership or renewing or starting anew. And we are also so thankful to you, Victor, for joining us this year today for BugFest. We really enjoyed learning about your passion and knowledge of bees. And we hope too for everybody who joined us today that you can think of carpenter bees as having more jobs than just digging holes into the wood at your house here in North Carolina in the South. So they have a really important job too. So thank you again for joining us. And with our last minute left, I believe Marcel would like to know, do some hibernate? And I think you mentioned the ones that would be considered perennial would be the ones that would overwinter, right?
Yeah, so some species they hibernate, as an adult. The adults, they just hide they find an empty wood, trunk, and they burrow a nest and they just lay there until the winter passes. That happens, as far as I know, in North and South America. But in the tropics, I was mentioning, when we don't have these seasons, they just stay there and the nests keep growing and growing, with their daughters. So sometimes you may find nests of carpenter bees with 12, 15 individuals. And some of these are pretty, probably 2.5 inches long, some of these bees. And if you disturb them, you have to run. Yeah, they're really big. You have to run away because they chase you, and yeah. So you can imagine how, if these bees are that big, the sting is really, really long too.
Okay, yeah. That's not one that you've tested out on your
own. No, exactly.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you again so much. This was really interesting, and we really enjoyed having a chance to work.
Thank you. Here. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. And I hope that you have enjoyed, the talking about carpenter bees. Really cool group.
And we have another carpenter bee program at 12 if you would like to join us again shortly. So thank you again for joining us today, and we will sign off and say goodbye for this particular program. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.